yes, this is really going to be a short slideshow. The whole point of it is understanding, when I originally put this together, like 4 years ago, I wound up changing it, calling it Decarbonization for Dummies. They're always not calling the people that were sitting in the audience dummies. I'm the dummy, because as in full disclosure, I thought I was dealing with operational carbon, right? So to me, operational carbon was the amount of energy that we were using in the building, and as energy managers and commissioning agents, we're trying to reduce but that's not all that's in there, and you'll see that in a minute. But it's broken up with decarbonization is embodied carbon, operational carbon, and net zero carbon. All right, real plain and simple, the embodied carbon is basically what it takes from cradle to the gate. And that's the first part of it, and then the second one is just building the building. That's when all the embodied carbon is in there. And I think it'll be a little bit better in one of these other ones. You can see it here, this illustration that was done by Stacy Smedley when she was with Skanska. As you can see here, it talks about this is all what goes on. All right, it doesn't like, oops, sorry. This whole area, there we go. This whole area is talking about, that's what the embodied carbon is. It talks about what's done from mining it, let's say, to be able to bring it to the location, all the trucks, everything that's required there. And then here, this is showing the operational carbon. And again, I was foolish enough to believe that we were only talking about the carbon of energy consumption, but that's not really all that it is. So you start to see, I thought these slides, which was put together by this guy, Steve, he calls himself the carbon architect. And this was a great slide that showed it together. And so if you look at this, it's cradle to gate. And that's where, in other words, where they're actually producing the carbon to dig it out of the ground and actually make the material. The next one is basically the actual construction of it. So I think that kind of makes a lot of sense to everybody, where all that carbon is coming from. And then you go into the next one, which is B1 emissions in uses. This is like where you get the off-gassing from carpets and things like that. But all of this, understand the one that I'm showing up here, all of those are still, almost all of them are embodied carbon. That's what threw me off when I put this together. That's all the embodied carbon. Because you think about it, like when you are repairing the building, you're still bringing trucks there, you're still buying material, you're still doing drywall, you're doing whatever, you're replacing carpets, you're doing all of that stuff. Does that make sense to everybody? And then this little itsy-bitsy piece, that is the energy that the building consumes. So that's why when he put together this little thing, he talks about that the operational carbon is that piece of the energy that you're actually using. And then you're going like, so you're probably looking at there is like, what are you talking about operational water use? What does that got to do with carbon? All right, unless you have a well on site, you have a local municipality that has to pump it to your building. They do something to get the water clean. That's energy that's consumed. That's what that operational carbon is right there. And then the last one, user carbon, is like for the local cars and stuff that you have on site. And then you have these is when the end of life carbon, so when you destroy the building and take it down. And that fancy roadmap basically shows you where all the different carbons are at a different point in their process. All right, so this is the learning part of today's lecture here. If you see here, the very top one, 110 gallons of gasoline consumed. So like for those who drive Hummers, that's like getting it around the block 3 times, and you've used that much energy, right? Then 1,000 pounds of coal burned, 40 barbecue things on, excuse me. 188 therms of natural gas. So now if you want to avoid that kind of carbon, you can do these things with 40 trash bags that are recycled, because then again you have methane, just creating methane, you're getting energy out of it. And then if you replace 40 incandescent 60-watt bulbs, which, God, there's only probably a handful of people in this room that even know what an incandescent bulb is, right? And you switch them to LEDs. And then you can sequester it is 6 by 16 tree seedlings growing for 10 years, or 1.2 acres of forest in 1 year. Now, before anybody in this room starts doing tons of salts down to think that we can grow our way out of this problem, you really can't. So I just want to give you a little bit of reality check. A natural gas fire plant, I had to write this down because I wouldn't remember these numbers because I'm not that smart. A natural gas fire plant produces 397,959 metric tons of CO2 per year. To break that down a little bit further, that's 45.43 metric tons per hour is 0.76 metric tons per minute. Okay, so basically in a blink of an eye, you wiped out all the trees. The Lorax is very upset if you try to do that, okay? And then just think about that. The coal-fired plants, they are 10 times the amounts that I just talked about. The only good thing is, I'm just gonna ask everybody here, do you think today we are using more or less coal-fired power? There's a misconception, I wanna know. Do you think we're using more or less than we used to? Is that? You think more? Anybody think less? Okay. Well, based on the most recent study that I've seen, we are using the amount of coal today equal to either 1906 or 1908. We're on that same level. So we're dramatically less, regardless of anything else. These are just facts that I got from public government websites. So, and just for those who, as human beings, we happen to be, visual beings. That's what, if you want to know what a metric ton would look like, if you just put it in a ball in the middle of the park, that's what it is. It's a 33-foot round sphere. All right, net zero carbon, you lower emissions, you figure out how to get the emissions, and you put enough PV or something to get yourself to net zero. Again, I'm not preaching what is the right thing to do. I'm just telling you what the conventional thinking is. Reducing embodied carbon. These are all the different things that make up carbon. This is more of like your lecture part of it, of understanding that the only thing that you're looking at here, which becomes pretty obvious, the one big thing is the most of embodied carbon is the concrete that goes into a building. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? That is one of the largest things in there. Oh, and by the way, since everybody's talking about steel tariffs or going to make things crazy, let's start building out of wood. Seriously, let's build out of CLT. It's right here in the United States, no tariffs. And you get a nicer building. All right, how do you reduce emissions? You go build nothing or less. Build nothing or less. I sound like a wise guy, right? Build nothing or less. What is build nothing or less? Think about how many existing buildings we have. Let's not tear them down. Let's just renovate it. Right? Let's do the right thing. Building efficiency, optimize the structure. How do you optimize the structure? For those who are mechanical engineers in the room, you all work for architects where they tell us to put the chillers and cooling towers and everything else at the top of the building because they don't want to see them, which now makes the building more expensive to build, and you have to put more concrete in the building, which we're trying to get out. Besides, and then you have copper conductors, you got to get all the way up there. It just goes on and on and on. The other way you can do it is we can convince architects, which I know I have to fully admit to everybody in the room that I am a recovering architect. original degree was in architecture, but I unfortunately designed ugly functional buildings when I was in. I didn't realize I'd be invoked now if I would have stayed at being an architect. But that's, that be it as it may. Put less glass in the building, right? But that's blasphemy to most architects that I know, because they do monuments of glass to themselves, right? And then reduce transportation. In other words, one of the things you try to do on a job site, anybody here ever been around a construction site once or twice in their life? What happens with most of all the trucks when they're waiting, they're sitting there in their diesel, right? So we can try to avoid some of that. All right, building performance standards. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You start to see, and this is an older map, you start to see that local areas are starting to bring in building performance standards. The one that I'm most familiar with right now is in Maryland, which is it started in Powell, in Maryland, where they're trying to reduce by 30%, or is it 50% by, looking at Charles, because he's my counterpart in the teacher. Isn't it 30% by 2030 is the start, and then the net zero by 2050. So, you start to see more and more municipalities, and there are, and if you don't meet them, there are penalties for them. So you start to see there's a lot of things that you can do there. Yeah, see that, you can see that was from one map to another, and I bet you if I can do it one more time, it's even more that are doing it. Okay, well, let's not do that. We're not done. Okay, so we'll leave it there. So since I have talked so much and my friends here have been laughing, you can tell I really don't need these things.
So yeah, we really just wanted to open it up a little bit to see what kind of challenges maybe some of you have been facing. Like Al shows on this map here. Depending on where you live, you may be hearing this a lot. You may not be hearing it much at all. And so really, maybe being able to take advantage of some folks who live in these areas where they're seeing it more, so that some of us who, may or may not be hearing it as much can learn from that. So, we have three very fine, not dummies, but people who are, willing to learn and willing to listen, to see, where your challenges have been and how we might be able to help. So we have a gentleman, our assistant here, who has the mic.
I'm kind of the same way. I can talk loud enough, I think.
I've been told not to talk so much. So a lot of things we talk about with this, the newer building, right, decarbonization, easier to do, right? If you have these more antique facilities that are on a central utility plant, and then you have to worry about, okay, well, how do we get rid of our fuel piping? How do we get rid of all these hazardous materials that have been out there, hazardous waste? Is it worth going through all that process? Because now you're telling the cost is going to be private to sort of that type of decarbonization. How do you go back and say it's worth it?
Well, it's funny. I with the project in New York City that has to comply with local law 97, where they're talking about metric tons of carbon. They're not looking at it from EUI, they're looking at it from carbon, right? Sometimes the economics makes absolutely no sense. And I hate to say that, but it makes absolutely no sense to do it because there's never a payback. It's cheaper for them to pay the penalties. I hate saying things like that because you want people to do the right thing. And that's where I think that sometimes you have to come up with some sort of a compromise. That's me. I try to look at it from a pragmatic view. You got to come up with a compromise of things. But right now, in most of those areas, there is no compromise. Either you are able to comply or you pay the penalty. And some have figured out we're going to pay the penalty because to retrofit the building, to do what they want, to get it where it is. There's no payback period, there's no economic. At the end of the day, regardless of what we think we need to do, something has got to pencil out to make economic sense, or otherwise people won't do it. I think that's my opinion.
Oh, okay. So specifically with a lot of these building energy performance standards, they're all staged. They're all coming in increments. So I live in Atlanta. We've had benchmarking standards since 2008. We haven't gone to the next step yet. There's just not that much engagement. So there's no stick to go with that carrot. It's just the right thing to do. But it's starting to come around. Maryland, DC, I think, went really, really fast and jumped right into, there's a carbon tax for not doing, for not decarbonizing these buildings. There's an actual financial penalty immediately. I'm not sure what they're going for net zero by 2035, 45. Yeah, so they're moving really fast. Maryland's doing something very similar. It started out with Montgomery County, then the rest of the state of Maryland's gone down this path. All these programs are run, and you'll see this is from Institute of Market Transformation. Fantastic website. I recommend following them. I think they're up to 50 jurisdictions. IMT helps write the standards, helps write the codes for these municipalities to put these programs in place. And then it helps them adapt the code to whatever pace they really need to move at. So they're not trying to do it all at once. We know the grid can't handle that. We know that the buildings can't handle that. There is that alternative path to compliance of paying the financial penalty. Charles and I did the same lecture that out there back in Maryland about a month ago, and he kept educating me on, it's not a penalty, it's an alternative path to compliance.
Tomatoes motto, right?
It's like buying the carbon credits instead of actually doing the work. Yeah.
Well, I want to say something. Does everybody understand what a carbon credit, where a carbon offset is?
No.
All right, I'm going to explain a carbon offset that everybody can understand. I'm going on a diet, Peter's going to lose my weight. No, I mean, I'm saying it as a joke, but that's the best way to understand it, because nothing is happening to your building. You are offsetting it someplace else, right? If anybody goes to Greenville, you can pay an extra $40 for offset your, or $50, whatever it is, to offset your carbon. I didn't offset anything. I gave somebody $50. Now, again, I'm not putting it down because the money goes to good uses, and I'm making a joke out of it, but the reality is, if you keep letting it be, kick the can down the road by you not having, like me not going on the diet, I'm never going to change my life, never going to change the building. So I just want to at least, because I always find more people have no idea what a carbon offset is or a carbon credit is, right?
Right.
So oftentimes designers need some standards or guidelines in order to meet decarbonization goals or whatever. What's out there for designers to use as that standard or guideline to help them get through the decarbonization designs?
So one with my ASHRAE background is Standard 100. And what that is it's a building performance standard for existing buildings. And ASHRAE puts that out. It just recently, within the last year, right, I believe, was updated. It is the most prevalent one that I know of. I'm sure there's other ones out there. But yeah, no, Ross makes a really good point. You know, we've kind of figured out in many ways, I don't know that we have every single answer yet, but when we're talking about new buildings, there are tried and true strategies out there to get a new building to be net zero or very close to net zero. But the challenge of existing buildings, right, is that they're all different. They all have different infrastructure that's already part of it. They have different, just energy profiles. But going through and I would say, really starting with an energy audit or a facilities conditions assessment kind of deal to understand what you have. Because as Al pointed out, there's, the superstructure is a lot of the embodied carbon, but there's more to it than that. Like there's embodied carbon in the ductwork or in the piping or whatever is, existing materials in the building. And, like the fan coils may need to be replaced or other pieces of the MEP structure may need to be replaced. But some of it might be worth keeping, So instead of, literally throwing the baby out with the bathwater kind of analogy, going in and really getting a good sense of what the MEP systems are, what possibly could be reused instead of just saying, oh, we're gutting it all and we're doing VRF or whatever the case may be, there may be opportunity there to save some of the materials that, if they had really good water treatment, if the piping looks really good, or, they actually changed their filters and the ductwork looks pretty good. All of those things kind of play in. So you can't really just say, oh, we're going to go in and we're going to go gut it. And, this is the solution if you don't really know what's in the building. So the challenge with existing buildings is really understanding what you have to work with and then coming up with maybe sometimes some creative solutions where, you know, you're able to reuse some things and not. But, you know, again, I wouldn't say that, you know, you should reuse it all because you could find, you know, an opportunity, right? You know, if you have a limited scope project and they're like, okay, well, we want to do this, this, and this, but we don't want to do that. It's the I don't want to do that bites you in the butt later on, right? And so, you know, oh, we're going to make all these changes, but we're not going to upgrade the BIS. Okay, really? Like, how is that really going to work out for you, right? And so having those conversations, honest conversations with your owners, because they're really looking to you to be that technical knowledge. They may or may not know the difference between, you know, a fan coil and a heat pump. And you have to be able to, you know, to talk to them about that, to make sure that they understand, you know, and on one of these things, he talked about life cycle costs, you know, and so if you're, you know, kind of advocating, and again, we don't really advocate for one particular system. We're trying to give our owners all of the information they need to make good decisions, right? And so in most areas of the country, I don't think this is going too far out on a limb, geothermal is going to be much more expensive than like a standard air source heat pump type of system. But what are their sustainability goals? You know, you can't just say, oh, you know, a ground source heat pump lasts this long and, you know, an air source system lasts this long, because the life cycles are very different, right? And so, you know, having that life cycle cost analysis, putting things into present dollars, recognizing that, you know, your geo field doesn't have a whole lot of maintenance, should last you a good 50 years, or good luck finding yourself an air source heat pump the last 50 years, right? And so, again, making sure that your owners have all of the information they need to make quality decisions and what that looks like.
And I think if you're going for a new building, that's an easier road to go down, mainly because you can go to the sites called like Epic, where you can put in looking at building the building in using traditional methods or doing it at CLT, and it'll actually show you how much of you are saving in sequestered carbon on them, or you can go that it's CL3, which is the doing carbon life cycle costs on the building. So there's many ways that you can do it, but I like the idea of I was thinking since we're here in Charlotte, one of the things, like think of it as an existing building. It's a 55 Chevy, and you're just going to put a new engine, right, that is more efficient, right? But you didn't get rid of the classic. You didn't get rid of what you had. You can still reuse it. Yes. All right.
I have a loud enough voice. The question I have is, everyone wants to reuse existing buildings, which I think is a great idea. The problem I try to understand is how do we get developers to get on board with reusing an existing building? Let's say it's only 2 or 3 stories, and they want to be able to make more money by going 15 stories. What's the incentive to try to get them to look at that versus instead of get away from the dollar of how much money they're going to make versus reusing that building?
It is a good one. And what Al said just a minute ago really is how it drives, is that doing the right thing isn't really enough motivation for most people. It does need to pencil out. And so if you're in a more, you know, urban area and maybe there isn't any new land available, or, you know, I mean, we all know, you know, about urban sprawl, and maybe instead of building like right in the heart of a downtown, now you're 10 miles out or whatever. But yeah, that's a really hard sell, to be honest. You know, I think the win there, quite honestly, is if you have somebody who's looking for about the amount of square footage that is in an existing building. It's going to be a hard sell if you're looking for 100,000 square feet and the building site you're looking at is a building of 30,000 square feet, right? It's not really going to meet the needs. And so, yeah, if it's not going to pencil out, even if it's close, a lot of times people will hedge on doing the right thing. But if it's not even close, it's not going to work. So.
No, this one, yeah. So this one's a much, yeah. So this one's a much deeper analysis. When New York was putting together Local Law 97, the Empire State Real Estate Trust went through and renovated the entire Empire State Building, and made it decarbonized. They took away all the fuel sources. They went to all heat pumps. They actually made the glass on site, redid all the windows, did the envelope. In the end, that building now draws less peak kW than it did when it was operating with a fuel power source. So it was a very concentrated effort, and it financially penciled. It worked. Now, they're getting a premium rent, so that helped, but it was a concentrated effort to get there. I've got a project right now in DC where we're trying to get a whole bunch of buildings that are on the mall off the central steam plant from GSA, because GSA doesn't want to upgrade the central steam plant. Current administration then told us that, no, you can't go back and electrify these buildings and decarbonize them. You've got to go back with fossil fuels. I was joking with Al this morning. I said the last time these buildings were running on fossil fuels is when horses and buggies were carrying coal up Constitution Avenue. So it's not practical in every case to go the cheap whatever route. It's not practical to not evaluate the electrification, decarbonizing strategies, just because they are going to fit better in a building where you don't want to run an exhaust stack out the back of the building, especially a historic one.
Yeah.
Well, I also think of it.
So, the thing of this is really right is particularly with some of the mindset of most Americans. We think that everything begins and starts here. It doesn't. I'll be honest with you, all of this technology that we're seeing has been vetted in Europe, in the Middle East, for at least 10 years. So the new technology isn't here. And it could be some of the same manufacturers, the carriers, the trains, but they're not doing it here. They are in other areas of the world where they're vetting these things out. And so I think, to your point, some of the newer technologies, are we there yet? No, we're not. It's part of the journey, right? It's just what the Levantes were talking about today. It's not just winning in the end. It's the journey of getting there. So I think, our manufacturers are doing what they can, but are we really where we need to be yet on the technology side? No. But most folks aren't, most building owners aren't going to fully decarbonize their buildings in one shot either. And so, if we're still struggling with, really good heating, start looking at your distribution systems, look for those fan coils, or change them to heat pumps. You can do this in stages, because for most owners, they can't afford to do it all at one time. So it really is a decarbonization journey, and so is the building performance standards, right? They all ratchet down. So I'm outside of Boston, and they're looking to do, in the city and in the suburbs right outside of Boston, they have goals of 2040 or before, but they have those energy per square foot based on building type. So it's not the same step down for a K-12 school as it is a tenant office building, as it is a college campus. Each one of them have a different ratchet schedule, if you will, but you don't have to get there right away. And what makes that, in Massachusetts, part of the benefit, though, is we have really good buy-in from our utilities and our state governments. They offer incentive programs. They offer, all sorts of ways for owners to invest in their buildings, and to make it more of a carrot than a stick kind of process. We are just starting the penalty or the fee phase. We've had years of you have to report your building's energy usage, and now, finally, everybody's kind of, oh, this applies to me. Because in all reality, particularly for our healthcare systems, most of the energy requirements that all other building types have had to, qualify for or whatever, at least in Massachusetts, hasn't applied to healthcare. It's always been patient first. And whatever energy you use, you go for it, because, you're not held to the same standard. Well, for the first time, in Boston, our system, it's called BERTO, and I never remember what what it stands. It was a reporting system in there somewhere. But for the first time, really, healthcare is being held accountable as well. And so, they always used to be able to be, oh, well, this doesn't really apply to us, and they go about their business, and now all of a sudden it's, oh, yeah, this does apply to us, and how are we going to get there? And so, it's a great opportunity, I think, for commissioning providers to be, and we've started getting some of these requests for proposals, is to help owners with a decarb plan. They want to know, how we're going to get there, because in all reality, particularly say for college campuses, that's a huge capital investment, right? And so how are we going to break that down? When do we need to replace our chillers? Because if you just put in a new chiller, nobody's going to want, to hear that they got to rip it out and put in something else, if it's not near the end of its useful life. So, again, I think it starts with, like I said, especially on the existing building side, evaluating what you have, knowing when, things are going to fail, and then being able to provide that plan and that capital planning strategy to make it really work for the owners.
I think the last piece of all of that, which some people have, some ignore it and some don't, is the talk about electrification, right? We have to electrify everything. The grid, depending on where you are, is not set up for it. Right? It's not really set up for it. It doesn't have the capacity to be able to handle it. So it's a global thing. It can't be. It's like, think about it. The building that was run all on fossil fuel, on fossil fuel, may not have adequate electric service to be able to handle the new heat pumps to come in. Yes, it's easy. 1 kW in equals 8 kW out when you're doing for a coefficient of performance. That's wonderful. But if you didn't account for that 1 kW to start with, and your service isn't big enough. Again, I'm not trying to be the Debbie Downer on this, but we have to look at it from everything has to be taken in. You can't be mono-focused, and that's sometimes, I think, as an industry, we want to focus and fix the problem, in one thing without looking at it globally. That's my opinion. Yeah, it's a global approach. It's everything, because things have a domino effect. I only talked about it in the EMP course of where the state of Georgia went out of its way to bring all these technology companies to Georgia. And the Wall Street Journal just came out recently with an article that said they're going to be 17% short being able to feed all these new industries. Yeah. Right. So it's a problem. And, I joke with somebody and I said, well, if it's in the Wall Street Journal at 17, it's probably really 30. But the point that I'm saying is that we have a problem. We have to address it all. It can't be just focused in one place. It has to be addressed all around. At least that's my opinion. Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay.
Last year at the Sales Energy in San Diego, I believe the mayor of San Diego was talking about decarbonization of San Diego. And their plan to maybe reduce 90% of the building by 2030. But in fact, they don't know how many buildings they have. They don't have any plan. They don't have any plan to do that. They don't have any information about the size of the buildings or what they're going to do there. But
And it's
we
2025.
are talking, so we're all talking about decarbonization, but there is no actual plan to do that. So do you think that our associations like ACG or ASHRAE or our cities are taking any considerations into the future to do that, or planning for doing that, or reducing the CO2 level in this country, or I don't know, because we just start talking about decarbonization, but nothing I've seen, so far as an action by cities or states or any of the associations.
Well, I think it depends on where you are.
I don't know if you heard something.
No, well,
We keep talking about decarbonization, but nothing there.
well, I will agree with you. It depends. Think about it. I hate to say this. Sometimes politicians say things because they think it's the right thing to say, but there's no way to implement it because they haven't thought it all the way through. They haven't brought the experts in to be able to go, wait, before you write a check that you can't cash, don't say these things, right? I always tell the story in the city I live in. Her Honor, the mayor had come, and I'm working on a performing arts center, and they said, we would like this facility to be carbon neutral. It's a performing arts center. I said, okay, could you ask Her Honor, the mayor, that what standard are we going to enforce it at? And they go, what are you talking about? I go, well, think about it. If we are going to do it as, in theory, the right way to do it, I have to now look at how many people come to the facility. How do they get there? A portion of them drive there. Some fly from New York to go to Tampa to go to that performing arts center because they can see Broadway shows there that they can't see in New York. So you got to take what percentage of them, you got to figure out what that carbon footprint is of flying a plane. Then you got to look at the trucks that bring all the the props and everything else, and forgetting about how each of those individual performers get there. And that's not even taking into account all the people that work there. And I said, okay, if we're really going to do that, this is an insurmountable thing. We're never going to get the carbon. Peter can't lose enough weight to get a carbon offset to get there. And I joked about it, and they just looked at me and goes, you're serious? I go, just tell me, you want to offset the carbon for the building itself, for the energy it's using? Yeah, we could talk about that. But if you want to truly say it, please tell her to stop saying things like that. Oh yeah, every party's got a pooper. That's why they invited me. So it's like but that's the reality of it. And I think that's how we have to be able to start addressing those things. Is that then you get to like we were only talking about it before about Colorado.
Yeah.
Right? There's certain areas that are very mono-focused on getting it, and they have the plans, and they are hiring consultants like ourselves to be able to get there and tell them what to do on all their buildings. I was in one after one. I didn't win it for Aspen. So some cities and municipalities are taking it to heart and figuring out, hey, we don't have anybody on staff that knows what the hell they're doing. So we're going to hire the right people. We're going to put an RFQ out, and we're going to get the right people to do it. At least that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it really is going to start with the municipalities and cities and towns that you see up on this map, right? And they're going to have the job of selling it to their neighboring municipalities, cities and towns, and saying, hey, again, it needs to pencil out, right? And one of the ways it pencils out that we as providers don't always think about is cost avoidance, right? And so if you have, a more senior cityscape, you have, maybe 80% of your buildings are existing buildings. And so but you want to grow or whatever. If you're able to reduce the energy from a lot of those existing buildings, then that's added capacity, right, that you don't have to build for. And so part of it is meeting people where they are and then trying to explain to them what the next steps are. But, you don't have all of these experts readily available necessarily in particular states and particular cities and towns. I mean, it depends on how they feel about their building codes, what code cycle are they on? Are they still on codes that are from, 2007, or are they closer to, 2018, So again, you kind of have to start those conversations. You have to see where they're at. Because, from the ASHRAE side with the building codes and the standards, the 90.1, the 62.1, we are always fighting up against the Home Builders Association. I don't think that's really a secret, because they want to keep the cost of building homes low. And we're over here saying, well, let's talk about resiliency. Let's talk about energy efficiency. We saw that in the last round of hurricanes that hit Florida. There were resilient communities that you did a drone flyover and it was like there was absolutely no damage. And you go, a mile down the road to something that was constructed in the 1960s and every structure is gone, right? And so, again, from an insurance standpoint, You know, if you're living in an area like that where you have more weather, events, the insurance industry really isn't on board yet. It's not really proven. So homeowners aren't really seeing a reduction in their insurance, but they're seeing a cost rise in what it took to build their house, right? So I think, in that case, I think over time, hopefully, we'll see, so you have a higher first cost, but you're seeing savings in your insurance premiums, right? We're hoping to get there. We're hoping to make that pencil out more. But it really does depend on who's the governor, who's, the town council, and having that information, because it really starts for us mostly on an advocacy piece on building codes and what's required, because codes are really the minimum. And if you're still building back to, like I said, 2007, you're not going to see the resiliency that you're going to see in newer buildings that are being built to a new building code.
Yes, sir.
With the procedure of decarbonization being such like a time and cost-intensive process, do you think it'll be too late before the public and everything catches on?
Actually, I don't think it'll be too late. Like we keep going back to this. It's going to be a staged introduction. You're going to have early adopters. The same thing with the EVs. People that went out and bought Teslas right away. We loved our electric car. I mean, the difference, the delta between gas and electric was fantastic as far as cost to operate, no oil changes, all those kind of things. So you're going to get people that jump on board really, really quick. And they're going to start to pave the way towards introducing some of these technologies that have been kind of waiting in the wings. I'm seeing heat pump chillers going in to replace reheat loop boilers, for college campuses in Florida now, becoming common. 10 years ago, you didn't see one of them. And now they're popping up. It's becoming standard design practice. So it's coming. It's the ball is moving.
Yeah, I think my only point on all of that is I think that we are getting to a point of where people are starting to see what needs to happen, and I think it's becoming more organic. Because I think there's a series of people that believe that they don't believe what they're hearing, right? Like, I'll be the first one to tell you, I remember going to a ASHRAE meeting in Florida in, I want to say it was 2007, 2008, and they said if we didn't change our ways, we would not be here in 2010. This was the president at the time, and I'm going, really? Okay. Hey, we're at 2025. I guess he was wrong. All right, but I say that as a joke, but the reality of it is I think people don't believe in all of the climate change or whatever. Whether you believe it or you don't, unless we start getting actual answers that are transparent, that everybody's talking the same talk. Because you think about it, we have people being paid because they believe that I'm going to say the earth is flat, and we have people being paid to do research that the earth is round. Instead of saying, you guys get together and we're only going to pay one, and you come up with it's a rectangular earth or something. I'm saying it as a joke, but until we get to that point, we're always going to have people that are going to scream on one side that it's this, and they're going to scream on this side it's that. And you're always going to have both. This is just me, maybe because I'm too old, and I want the answer. I don't want platitudes. I think we have to find what's the real thing, and then I think once everybody believes we're marching down that same path together, this country could do great things when it puts its mind behind it. We have the greatest minds in this country that we could solve any problem. We put people on the moon, right? We could do anything in this country. This is the greatest country on earth. But until we get it together and we're all marching on it one foot after the other together, we're never going to get there. But we are starting to, because people are starting to see the realities. I'm sorry if I'm preaching everybody, but that's how I truly believe what it is, because we have to solve the problem. Because I want my children's to have clean air, clean water, and power. That's the reason I do what I do.
Wondering if you could potentially give us a few examples of some of your favorite decarbonization strategies, be it because of the impact that it made or because of the uniqueness
Okay, I'll jump in. So I do a lot of retrofit work in the southeast, or on the eastern half of the country, put it that way. So latent load is a big piece of that puzzle. So when Al was talking earlier about looking at the systems and systems, systems within systems, when you start isolating, this is how much the HVAC load is in this building. We know what lighting is. We know what the power, how that power pie breaks down. You look at what latent, what we do to dehumidify, and then have to reheat in a lot of these buildings, especially schools. We're ventilating like crazy. And down here, you get down into Central Florida, you get down to Al's neighborhood, and it's like 100 CFM per ton for fresh air to be conditioned. So there's new technologies out, and they're not brand new. They're just a different way to chew on that piece of the puzzle, that are now using like chilled water to a preheat or preconditioning coil that goes, the water flow rate through that coil is so slow that you're getting really dry air at warm conditions. So it's delivering 90-degree air, but completely wrung out of moisture. So you don't have to reheat it. You temper that with your normal chilled water coil, which is now set for what's going on in the space and reacting to temperature, temperature set point, dry bulb essentially. And that dehumidification load is now handled without having to reheat it. So you've just solved two of the big pieces of the puzzle, and now if you start actually treating the air properly rather than just trying to dilute it, you can squeeze that down even further. So big change in energy usage there, huge leaps forward. We're actually seeing better indoor environmental quality because of some of those pre-treatment conditions. See the same thing with medical office or medical procedure spaces. So doctors' offices, that same desire to make an operating suite really, really cold, and you're flirting with condensation on the walls, and now you've got you can't use that operating suite because you got bacteria in there. If you make it dry, it doesn't have to be as cold. So doctors are happier, the patient's happier, patient scores go up, energy usage goes way down from $10 a square foot down to like $3. So yeah, there's some stuff out there. And it's getting more and more popular. It's starting to become, closer to standard practice versus the old tried and true way of, we'll just reheat it.
Probably one of the ones I will say that I was most proud of, I was working on an airport. We were going to put a new central energy plant. We had 8 to 10 years of data on the existing plant. So it's not like 1 year or 2 years. It was 8 or 10 years. That plant never went, in the middle of the winter, never went under 900 tons. Never went under 900 tons. It was a primary, secondary system. We put in a new plant, variable flow primary. We couldn't keep the chiller online because we had a load of less than 150 tons. And you say, how could you, Al, you just said you had 800 or 900 tons minimum. That is the wasted energy or ghost loads that are part of a primary, secondary system that we don't understand, because you now have pumps operating on both. Either they're over pumping on one side or under pumping on the other side. When you match them up, then what the manufacturer is telling you on a kW per ton really happens, because I've gone back out and done actual testing of what's going on, and that machine that's supposed to be a 0.6 kW per ton is operating at 0.8 because of all the ghost load of wasted energy. So those are one of my favorites of what I always encourage people to change their plants to variable flow primary.
So we have a project, and it's very early days, so I can't tell you how it's actually going to work out. But what was really exciting for us, so like you said, I am mostly focused in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. We saw an RFP like 6 or 8 months ago for a fairly large middle school up in Maine. Now, we've been trying to kind of do some more work up in Maine. We hadn't really gotten a good sense that anybody was really on the decarbonization bandwagon, so we were just kind of waiting to see what kind of came out. So we had this RFP, and basically they're looking at it. It's a hybrid, heat pump chiller. They're doing thermal storage. They're doing all of these things in the backwoods of Maine. I'm really excited about that, right? Because it's not where we normally get this kind of of work for, and this is probably going to blow most of your minds, but so we put an RFP together. I sent it to my boss. I put a fee detail together, and he's like, "This isn't enough." And I'm like, "It's a public school. If I put any more on this, we're not going to get it." And so he marks it up. He probably added a good $60,000 to this proposal, and I'm just like, "Damn it! We're not going to get this. It's not going to happen." I was just like so discouraged. I put it out, and I really wasn't expecting much. The architecture firm was out of Boston, and I'm like, okay, at least I don't think many people are doing big decarb plans in Maine. I don't know how many other firms we're going to be competing against. But we get a call from the architect, and they said, yeah, you weren't the cheapest, but you have the experience that we want. We've been doing some geothermal in Mass. We've been doing some other things. We really think you're the team. Let's set up a meeting to talk about your fee detail. Ugh. Okay, shit. So I get on this call, and we have a building envelope commissioning provider as well on our team, and so she and I kind of sat on this call, and they're like, okay, well, we want you to provide more site visits. We want you to do this. We want you to do that. And so we made all these markups, and they're like, okay, can you give us a new price in a week? And I was like, oh, okay. Like, you literally had to pick my chin up off the floor, because I've never gone into a fee detail conversation and been on the winning end, right? And so we did. We kind of went through. We did everything that they said. Came in a little higher than they wanted, so we then knocked a couple of things down. But I'll tell you, it's a world of difference when you're working with people that actually understand the value that you bring to the project. And so they weren't looking to shortchange us in the beginning. We've done full-fledged design reviews for them. Like I said, we have a building envelope commissioning provider on our team as well, and they were just stoked by the feedback that we gave them. And shockingly enough, the design engineers were actually receptive to the comments and the considerations we asked them to consider, and it's really just been a really good experience. So I'm hoping to be able to give you a little bit of an update, maybe in Chicago next year. But it's the excitement of working with a team of professionals that really listen to each other. And the client's going to win, and they're going to win big in this community in Maine. So we're really excited. We'll let you know.
So I'm in Maine.
Okay.
Can you say the name of the school or not?
It's the Raymond Middle School in Wyndham.
Wyndham Raymond School.
Yes.
I just put a proposal in to be the third-party testing agency.
Sweet. Maybe we'll get to hook up. That's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, they just selected the GC. It's Landry French. And sweet. Well, nice to see you. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, really. That's awesome. I don't see his proposal. There is no win there, but
I know the facilities director.
okay. They seem like a solid group. Because the other thing we haven't really talked about that I'd really like to just make a quick plug on, guess what, folks? It's training. If we're not training the facilities folks that are going to inherit the buildings that we're building or retrofitting, within 5 years, it's all going to be for naught. I think you might have one more. Yeah.
Now, you wrapped up, or you said this earlier, Europe is 10 years, give or take, ahead of America.
Yeah.
In technology and advances. I was asked to do a study on the school that put in the VRF. Fortunately, the winning mechanical contractor hired a subcontractor. Neither one knew which way was up in installing a VRF system. Or simple phrasing techniques.
Wow. Yep.
So that system is doomed to fail.
From the very beginning. Yep.
How do we train, that's training, not only the building operators, but also the contractors installing the equipment? How do we ensure the contractors are trained in proper installation practices?
They have to read the specs. If you don't hold them accountable, we just had this problem.
And I wasn't the commission firm.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I had an issue, so our commissioning team, the bigger company that we're part of, is a very large team of owners, project managers. They don't know MEP systems, but they call us in when they have issues. And I got a call, same kind of thing. It was a VRF system. There were a lot of concerns. The controls don't work for it. Shocker. But, a lot of other things. And it really came down to, and so he started sending me sections of the spec he thought were relevant. I was like, just send me the whole spec. And I found entire training paragraphs that required the contractor that won the bid and the subcontractors putting the systems in, that they had to attend the manufacturer's training sessions and like so many hours, and the manufacturer had committed to being on site on different, like it literally, said at these milestones, when these systems are being, brazed in, and then when this happens, then when this happens, and that the manufacturer was supposed to be on site for all of these things. If you don't hold them accountable to what's in the spec, you're going to lose every single time. And that's what I told the OPM. I said, look, this was all owned, and it is very clear that based on what you're telling me the issues are, they did not have this kind of relationship with the manufacturer. And it was design build, which makes it even worse, right? Because the engineer really doesn't really design it, right? They're leaving it into the hands with higher risk comes higher reward. Well, here, higher risk came with a big price tag. So, yeah.
Same with this project. The design engineer was like, oh, it's not my build, it's not my project. And the drawings that were provided at the end of the project were the preliminary drawings from Train instead of the final drawings from LG. And I'm like, nothing is relevant to what your as-built or your documents are. Doomed to fail.
All right. I think we're done. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah,
if you have
thank
any
you.
questions, we're here. Appreciate it.